On a personal note and also a Jewish communal note, today is the anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of Lubavitch. And it's a very, how should I say, important day in the Chabad calendar, but it's also, I guess in the calendar in the Jewish world, it's an important day. And it's interesting that it comes out during this parsha this week, this reading for this week, which first discusses the red heifer, and then talks about the passing of Miriam, and then the water supply disappearing, and so we begin to understand that the well came from her in her marriage because it disappeared when she passed away. It disappeared. So, and Rashi comments that why these two stories put together, why these two different matters, two chapters side by side. The red heifer, which that ritual brings about the atonement for an Israelite from touching the dead corpse. And here we have the story of Miriam's passing. So Rashi brings a comment of our sages that this is to teach us that the passing of a righteous person atones in the same way that the holy sacrifices atone, which in itself teaches us a second thing, and that is that a red heifer is like a sacrifice. We didn't know that either to begin with. Although when we see the procedure, it has some similarities, and it's very strange and very odd, which is, I guess, also another reason why it's considered a statute that is without reason. But it's not only, as far as the reason for the red heifer I just said, is it's supposed to purify from the contamination of a dead corpse. However, I guess why that's the case, how does it go about doing that? And also the strange procedure, as I said, like in certain ways, it's very similar to a sacrifice, to an offering. It's supposed to be brought, it's supposed to be, mainly the blood is sprinkled by Elazar the priest, and then it's completely burnt. So these things seem to point to the fact that it's an offering. Yet at the same time, it's being brought outside of not only the temple, but even Jerusalem completely. And he's supposed to be taken, it's done from a mountaintop, which from there, the Kohen, the priest can gaze at the temple sanctuary towards the Holy of Holies. So he's looking there, but he's far away. So we know that it's forbidden to bring an offering outside of the temple. Here we're specifically told to bring it outside of the temple. Additionally, anyone who touches it, the red heifer becomes impure, and then they have to immerse in purifying waters which is also interesting. Why does this thing that purified make everyone around it impure? So there's a lot of strange things about it, which is why it says, immediately Rashi tells us on the first words of the reading, the very first comment of Rashi is that when it says, this is the statute of the Torah, that's in chapter 19 of Numbers, verse 2, he says, the Satan and the nations of the world will come and they'll argue with Israel. They'll say, what is this commandment over here? What is this? And what reason does it have? Therefore, it says this is a decree. Don't question it. So we learn a lot of things from this. Well, I'm just looking at it in terms, we learn how to respond to those who are cynics. We're learning how to respond here. because basically it's saying don't respond. Isn't that kind of way it's saying? Or it's saying don't engage in trying to answer the question. Just put your foot down and say this is a decree. We don't know, but this is so it was commanded. Don't get into a discussion with them. Try to find an rationalization. Just tell them this is a decree. We have no right to doubt it or try to, again, kind of use critical thinking to try to philosophize about what it is. In other words, the point is with doubt. I mean, we can try to find reasons within once we accept it, but you're not allowed to kind of, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? Should I do this? Should I not do this? Those are the thoughts that Rashi is telling us we shouldn't have. But we should accept this as a decree, not question it. So it's interesting that so the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains about this, or he brings out, at least probably mentioned by others before him, that, well, he brings out, he says that, why is it that this offering is brought far away from the holies? And he says, because this is, and why is it completely burnt up? Even the innards and everything in it is burnt up. He says, because it comes to rectify death itself. Death really in this world is not redeemable. It can't be redeemed. It can only be totally wiped away in the Messianic age. But it's a form of impurity that we can't eradicate. So therefore, no, I should say it a different way. It's not that we can't eradicate. Of course, we can't eradicate it. It's part of the decree of after Adam. But the point is, we can't refine it. We can't cure it. It's a part of humanity that remains. It's an impurity that remains. What's the impurity of death? Well, death separates divinity, spiritual from the physical, where the body is left without its direct divine connection, without its spiritual connection. Obviously, at the same time, the body is being sustained by God's will continuously and by godly energy continuously. But nevertheless, in its revealed state, the body is very distant and almost antithetical to godliness, and the soul, on the other hand, is the opposite. So their being severed causes the body to lose its ability to continue living, and becomes just a piece of flesh and deteriorates and rots. So that's not something we can do anything about. So that's why the red heifer is done outside of the camp, because the temple was for refinement. Things we can refine, things we can bring over to the good side, they belong in the temple. But the red heifer, that's something that has to be totally eradicated. And it's a procedure that is reminiscent of the time to come, of the Messianic age and afterwards. It's not something that, so that's why also it's something that the evil inclination and the nations that are hostile or foreign to Jewish ideas, they don't understand it. They complain about this because it's something that's, well, as Rashi said, it's something that's faith-based. It's something that goes beyond reason, something that we can't comprehend. There's another way to look at it, but let's look at this for a moment. And then, look, there's more questions about that. It's not a closed book. That's a very deep idea, and it needs more examination. But that's it for now. There's another point here, which is maybe more important to us, really, in our day-to-day, more important for the Noahide community. And that is the fact that death represents depression and sadness and despair. The idea of death in a person, a certain degree of death when a person is lethargic, when a person doesn't have any vibrancy. When the person is down and pessimistic, it's a certain element of death there in the person. You could say it's coming from the element of earth in the person. It's being drawn down towards sadness. And the red heifer, represents a cure for this. So in reality, sadness is something we have to completely get away from, which is what the red heifer represents. You have to burn it up completely. You don't leave any remnant of it. And I guess I can add to this is that it's a very hard thing to eradicate. It's not easy to eradicate, which is the idea that these prosecuting elements come and say, what's the idea behind this total destruction of sadness? What's the idea behind the red heifer? In other words, it's an allusion to the fact that there's many, many obstacles to uprooting sadness and pessimism. It's very difficult to really deeply uproot it. Of course, it's easy when things are going a person's way. A person may not feel a lot of pessimism. But point is that in situations when the person needs to persevere and has facing obstacles and has to deal with this difficult character trait of depression, that person has to just completely eject it, completely reject it. I mean, that's often very difficult to do. The person went through traumas, the person has had very serious disappointments in life. It's so easy to tell people, oh, just be happy, just be happy. And so it's very easy for a rabbi to come up here and lecture and say, oh, just completely reject it. At the same time, it is also no less, urgent to say it, that a person has to, in the same way that we understand that poison, we don't eat it even if we're, in a really bad mood. Look, if someone is clinically ill, depressed in a way that they're, suicidal or it's very severe, obviously they need to get professional help. They may need some kind of medication for a while. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. But I'm talking about it per point, 2 points. First of all, number one is that I'm talking about a point where a person is not at that place yet. And so they're not coming to that low state yet. That's number one. We're actually talking about a spot in which person hasn't fallen into depression yet. And the idea is to flee from it, to flee from negative thoughts, to flee away from feelings of despair. And just to completely reject them out of hand without explanation. That's kind of what we're saying here, is that, again, following the same line of thinking, that this is something that needs to be done instinctively without discussion within the person's mind. Yeah, but there's no buts. It should be just outright rejected. It's not a way of living. So because of that, it has to be completely just rejected. And it's not easy to do. But I think, in the Hasidic approach is to focus on the positive, which is to think and emphasizing in your life the good. See the good as much as you can. Focus on the good as much as you can. See the glass that's half full. I mean, if we're all alive, there's certainly good going on. We have to try really, really work on a habit of thinking thoughts. Try to control our thoughts. Try to think. Maybe a time of meditation would be a good idea. I think it's a good idea for me. You know what? I should try it. Of just taking maybe 10 minutes, maybe start even 5 minutes, and thinking everything that I need, I'm blessed with. What are all the good things that I have? And think about those for a few minutes. before thinking about problems, and because the thing is that we naturally think of the problems because we're trying to problem solve. So there's a natural tendency in a person to think about the problems as what isn't a problem. It's okay, that's covered. Now, what about this issue? And on its surface, that seems like a good idea. But the problem is, first of all, there are things we can't solve. And so, but the human brain is still thinking about those things, maybe trying to, grope at some type of solution, even maybe there isn't one. Or just, that in our sensitivity, we dream and hope for something much, much different, much, much better. And maybe that's a messianic thing. Maybe, the fact that we want to see a utopian world, maybe that just shows something really good about us. But the problem is sometimes it's these really good qualities can also be very dangerous. So in other words, what I'm saying is that our expectation of a utopian reality and being down about the sufferings in the world or our own suffering and difficulties is potentially a terrible drawback. If it gets us down, if it gets us depressed, if it gets us pessimistic, gets us in a state of despair, as opposed to, getting us up in arms to fight and to fight against this problem and to fight against and to try to see a solution to become more determined with Hashem's help. But I always like to think about how can we turn tragic events into a way of coming closer to God as opposed to getting farther away. Because I think there's a natural tendency in a person to be upset at God, and so, but we don't want this to hurt our relationship. Obviously, it's terribly counterproductive and it's also unfair. It's inaccurate of the full picture of what we are being given, even from where we can see. But let's just say things are really, really bad. Still, do we really want to separate from the source of life and truth? Because there are things we don't understand. So basically my suggestion is that, as we see in the Bible so many times, that during times of trouble, we should turn that into a time of prayer. We should turn that into a time of crying out for more help, of making us realize that we need help. And that in a certain sense we're hopeless. We keep trying to find solutions. No matter what we do, there's some other problem or that same problem just doesn't go away. And that we can only turn to Him. We have to turn to prayer, real prayer. I think it's something really, really needed, really, really needed today. A real prayer. And it also just shows you we're not, thank God, we're not that broken that we've come into real prayer, thank God. But, we need to take a look. Look at the children of Israel in Egypt. They suffered so much until they cried out. And God listened. I guess the question is, are we crying out? Are we crying out for help? Or are we just, saying things mechanically or, putting in a little bit of something, but, then we're going on with our day. And point is, the idea of crying out, it's basically, it's begging. It's like we need your help. We have nowhere to turn. We can't, there aren't any other solutions. There's no committees that can help us. There's no congressman, there isn't any law or anything. There's nothing that can help. Only you can help. That's to me crying out. It's from a place of desperation, from a place of realization that there's no one else that can help us. And really understanding that our help comes from God. I think God really wants to hear more of that. I think He wants more intimate prayer. Okay. But the final point about sadness is not to have any argument about it, whether it's correct or not, but just to flee. This idea of no thinking about it, just instinctively run away from it. Nothing to do with it. We have to be full of optimism, but it's not an optimism that comes from frivolity. It's an optimism that itself comes from faith in the intrinsic meaning of living and the intrinsic value of any innocent, any act that's devoted to God, any mitzvah, as we say, right? Any good thought, and it's intrinsic and infinite meaning. And when you have that, and as the Rebbe speaks about so many times, the fact that person has a divine soul, a soul that's connected to the divine. This should give a person, intrinsic happiness, that in his own worth and his own value and what he's doing, that he should be happy. And we need to work on this, because the body doesn't want this. The body's feeling whatever it is, the problems that we have. It wants a better physical life, or it doesn't want the problems that we have, and it's sad. It's disappointed, and we have to. I guess the point is, we're spiritual focused, the more a person can be happy despite anything that goes on around him. And it is really a question of faith also. It's like the story, the famous Hasidic story that so many people say over, of the Rabbi Elimelech and his brother, Rabbi Zusha, that they were thrown into Tsar's prison. I don't know the reason. I don't recall. Maybe it was just simply because often Jews were put in prison because they didn't pay debts to Polish or other Eastern European landowners, different nobles. I don't recall the reason, but they were put in prison, and the time for prayer was approaching. And unfortunately, they had in the room, they had the what do you call that again? The chamber pot, as they used to call it, was in the room with them, and they couldn't pray. You're not allowed to pray in that type of circumstance. So one of the brothers was starting to get disappointed. What are we gonna do? We can't pray. The other one said, no, but since Hashem put us in this situation, and since, according to the law, we're not allowed to pray in this situation, our service right now is not to pray. And they started to dance over this. If they accepted the situation, they started to dance, that this is God's will, and they were doing it. Now, when the guards saw this, that these two Jews were happy, actually, the story goes they were dancing around the chamber pot. So when the guards saw this bizarre scene, all he knew was he didn't want these two Jews that were being in prison happy. So he came in, he took out the chamber pot. So long story short, they were then able to pray. But the point of this story is the happiness from small things, right? I mean, often, and I admit to this myself, and we have religious expectations also that can be disappointed with. Maybe we want to learn more. Maybe we wish our character was better. Maybe, I don't know, we want to have a more vibrant religious community experience, and we don't have it, But in reality, that's also part of our service, part of our mission is to be happy and the faith in what God has given us. And if we can do that and be happy, that's our real mission. Real mission is to find happiness in what we've been given and try to find what's the spiritual meaning, why this has happened to us, and try to get something from that and to gain more determination from that. But incredible story, very Hasidic story, because it's not like saying, oh, they were great Talmudic scholars and they knew all this by heart. It's a very simple story, something anybody can aspire to in a certain sense. Because in other words, even in your work, In fact, the lowest Jew, lowest person in the worst circumstances, Jew or non-Jew, could could learn a lesson from this story. And even there, a person could be happy and worship God, even with a lot of impediments, whatever's going on. And I think I can add that I try to do work on is to think of being happy as a mitzvah itself, and therefore to try to be happy for its own sake. Just try to sing, try to be happy for its own sake, for no reason, because God also wants us to be happy. We can only do Torah and the commandments properly if we're happy. So we need to work on being happy. That is also something that just has to be. And so it's all related to this idea of not something to think about. I'm not happy because of this reason, another reason, no reason, just happy. For its own sake. Again, it's but at the same time, not out of folly, not out of frivolity, meaning not a happiness that's coming from gluttony or from any type of transgression, God forbid, any type of hedonist behavior that's forbidden or anything like that. But or not a happiness that's connected to any excess, but an intrinsic one. Just to be happy to be alive, that God has given us the gift of life, and that we can do good things. And that'll lead us to more good. If we're happy about holy things, then that'll lead us to do more good things. If we're happy about hedonist things, that's the problem, is then what happens is if a person starts feeling bad, they become addicted to doing that thing. I mean, for example, with some kind. So we can indulge a little bit. We do see that not indulge, but in Judaism, for example, we see people drink wine on the Sabbath and eat good food. But we have to understand that that doesn't mean we're happy because we're eating good food. It's the opposite. Because we're happy, we're an expression of the happiness, we're eating good food. In other words, we're happy that today is a Sabbath. It's a day to celebrate because of what it is. Because God is with us on this day, because this is a day that celebrates God's kingdom, therefore we're happy, and we express it by doing things that make a human being, physical person, happy. But it's not that, hey, you want to party, we're going to go party. In other words, the happiness comes through physically feeling physical pleasures. No, it has to be an expression that it helps liven you up. It gives you. That's why the sages instituted that when the Sabbath comes in, you make something called kiddush or kiddush over wine, because the idea is that our declaration of the sanctity of the Sabbath is something that comes with joy. But it's not that we're just getting drunk or something. It's a method to connect us physically with what we're supposed to be feeling spiritually. So that's what we have to keep in mind. So, for example, today on the Rebbe's Yurtzeit, the person wanted to make a l'chaim, and to remember, and because they feel connected to the Rebbe and his vision, then that's something that's something that we can make l'chaim on. We can have a drink about it. It's an expression of our happiness over the fact that the Zohar says that when a tzaddik passes away, their influence only grows because they're out of the limitation that whatever limits the body had on a tzaddik no longer exist. So their neshama can have their soul can affect things. Space is no longer, there's no bounds, and therefore there's a celebration because the soul of a tzaddik ascends every year higher and higher, and his effect, and so our connection with him goes higher and higher. So it's not a time, again, it's connected to this idea of depression. It's not a time to feel despair that we've lost the tzaddik. It's a time to connect deeper and to realize that his teachings are farther reaching, and we can understand them better this year than we did last year, and therefore we can connect more this year than we did last year. Yeah, I mean, the truth is that everyone's talking about what can we learn from the Rebbe? What is his greatest legacy? What was his greatest legacy? And there's so many things that, I mean, the Rebbe really, he spoke about so many different topics. How can you, and he believed in so many different important things. People say Mashiach. People say that the Rebbe, that his whole energy was in to bring Mashiach, and that people should work on bringing Mashiach by studying more Torah and doing more good deeds. And then his outreach, which is interconnected with Mashiach, which is to spread, is to strengthen people in their belief in God and Hasidic teachings and observing the commandments, etc. All people started with the Jewish people, but then he talked about the Bnei Noach too, very often, particularly in later years. So there's those two things. There's the Messiah, there's outreach. But there's one point, and we've been talking about it, that I think represents everything, and it's the point of moving forward in holiness. It's always about adding more in holiness, doing more, and then we're moving forward in a positive way, always ahead, always moving, always to try to do more, always try to affect the person more, others more, always to try to, on yourself, add something, continuously adding, never stopping, always on the offensive. It wasn't cyclical with the Rebbe. It wasn't that this is what we do, and we need to keep within this confine of what we do, and that's it, and that's the main thing. Just keep doing what we're doing till now. There was never such a thing like that. There's always more. And I heard an interesting story, like someone, there was one of his, Hasidim, one of his students, the disciples, heard that they, time after time, that during many of his talks, he talked about increasing Torah study. So the student asked him, since the Rebbe spoke about this, I've been adding, I have no more time in the day. I can't add anymore. I can't, I have to, I have to sleep. So the Rebbe answered him, he said, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It doesn't mean every minute, but it's how. How you're doing it with more feeling, more intensity, more commitment, how important it is to you and whether you're thinking about it throughout the day, things like that. But it's just an example of the idea of adding. So you can say, how can he add? I mean, things are limited. A person's day is limited. How can he continuously add? How's that possible? That's the answer. It doesn't necessarily mean quantitatively. It could mean qualitatively. How our connection, our emotional connection to a mitzvah, a Torah study, our vigor in our Torah study and in our performance of commandments, and how we're in our intention when we're doing it. Can we doing it thinking of others more, thinking of God more, thinking of bringing Mashiach more through a mitzvah. Try to do it maybe more meticulously. Also, try to study it more and do it more in a more meticulous fashion. But the idea of passion about it, being impassioned into doing more, to trying to do it, you're going up, you're moving up, and it's kind of like the idea of Hasidic teachings about a person's love or a tzaddik's love for God, in which he expires into God. But there's also another, that's the very high level of the righteous. There's also the level of thirsting for God. And I think that's the level that's closer to this idea of pushing ahead. You're thirsting, you're so hungry, so you're running after it to get more of it. You're thirsty. There's a thirst for God that a person, through deep contemplation, person can come to a thirst for God. So, and that's also another answer when a person feels distant from God. So the person asks, how could I not feel depressed? And I know I'm so distant. I've done so many transgressions. I did so many transgressions in the past. I feel like I have bad habits, I have bad character traits. I feel so low. And so the answer is the thirst. That from the distance, a person could feel a greater yearning because they feel so far. And I think part of that comes from, though, but at the same time, not feeling despair that you can't, not giving up that you can't come close. In other words, it's a far that you feel you can reach, though. You feel you need to reach. And that's the idea of a thirst. And when you're in the desert and you're really thirsty, you don't ever give up from wanting to get water. On the other hand, the moon, a person can look at the moon. I don't know, a person never think they'll ever reach the moon, but water, the person doesn't have, he's got to get some. So, point is to turn, and that's the idea of returning to God, repenting out of love. The person turns the sin upside down. The sin used to be something that caused a distance, but instead of that, it catapults the person into a deep desire to be close, that feeling is so powerful that it pushes them up and catapults them to a higher level than even a tzaddik, possibly. Because a tzaddik was always good, and so he's going up very short levels, a little bit. This person's passion is so strong because he's so thirsty, because he feels so empty because of what he did, that he catapults himself higher. So, in other words, again, my point is to teach the lesson. When a person feels that they've done something wrong, then they know that Hashem always accepts person's tshuva, and therefore they should reach up high. It's the same idea we started with prayer. The person should cry out to God when they realize that only His help can do something. But same thing when a person feels distant, a person should reach out and run and try to come close because they feel distant. So, and I guess the same thing about Mashiach, about the coming of the Messiah, in a way, the true and complete redemption, is the Rebbe wanted us to study about it. And but not just to mechanically study about it. I think in order to really yearn for it, to want it to happen, and to believe that it could happen at any moment that it's imminent. And if only somehow just the right things were done, this could happen. So, someone said that, the belief in the Messiah is a belief that God can turn the world upside down. But it's also the belief, the point is, it's incredible optimism and hope. And obviously, if a person believes in Mashiach, then they have to believe, they should believe in their own personal Mashiach. Meaning to say, even if things are going wrong in their life, and things just seems like they can't get out, never give up. The next moment, something can happen, and your life can change. The things you thought that there's no hope, it can change. We should not allow to give up. A person who is connected to Judaism should never give up. And we all have to work on this also. Have to work on that idea that God controls everything. Just because up until now, the circumstances that He's put before us seem like they're not going right, but that's the whole story of the Torah, is that the Jewish people did wrong, and God already prophesied to Moses. I see they're gonna go astray, and they're gonna encounter a lot of troubles, very bad troubles. But in the end, we will make up. In the end, they are going to return. And so that's a tremendous lesson of hope. Even when things go really bad, that things can turn around. And things will eventually turn around. And therefore, we should never lose hope, and we have to continue to be determined that things will turn around for the right and for the good, and that doing good deeds do count. So it's a really very profound idea. On its surface, it just seems like, okay, we gotta bring Mashiach, and it is amazing. But the point is, when you think about it in a deep sense, it's to believe in turning things around, even spontaneously, is possible. The same way, just thinking about current events, and I'm really glad I'm having this talk, because I think that it's gotten me thinking about it. Because, obviously for the Jewish people over the past, since October 7th, has been a terrible blow. And I wish I could say that, everything is hunky-dory, everything's great now. It's not great. And person could fall into sadness and despair. But what I'm saying now is the same way that suddenly on Simchas Torah, on the Jewish holiday last year, October, that was taking place on October 7th and on the Sabbath, things went so bad and things that people didn't expect went wrong and shocked us. If that's the case, how much more so good things can happen that will shock us, and God willing, wonderful surprises can happen. We have to believe in those things, and it's not easy to believe in those things because our nature is to judge based on past experiences. Past experiences maybe don't seem like they've been so amazing. And so this is not an easy thing. But this is again one of the things that Rabbi deeply wanted us to work on.